Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, from wherever you're joining us, and welcome to today's webinar titled Bridging the Gap Strategies for Patient Centered Real World Evidence in Rare Diseases, featuring speakers Megan Gower and Edward Chou from Takeda, and today's moderator, Richard Tsai from Inspire. Today, they will explore real challenges and solutions for generating patient centered real world evidence in the context of rare diseases. I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's event, Inspire, for making it all possible. And now, without any further delay, I'm very pleased to welcome Richard to join me. Hi, Richard. Please take it away.
Thank you, Sydney, for that wonderful introduction and important housekeeping notes. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Richard Tsai, the SVP of Rural Evidence and Head of Health Journey at Inspire. I'm delighted to be the host, or Sydney, co-host with Sydney, and the moderator for the webinar program today, along with two really great, outstanding speakers, Megan and Edward. Here are the program's goals in the next hour. We'll have a refresher on what is rural data and rural evidence, and we'll discuss some of the key components for rural data and rural evidence, as well as some of the common challenges that we can look at. And we'll finally look at some of the recommendations for patient-centered rural evidence in rare diseases. Then we'll learn about some of the best practices, methodologies, and innovative strategies to consider in evidence generation for rare diseases. So hopefully together at the end, we'll be able to discover some of the benefits and impact patient-centered rural evidence can bring to the work we do. At the end, we'll have a moderated Q&A discussion with our speakers, Edward and Megan. Throughout the session, like Cindy said, there's a Q&A feature where you can freely submit your questions to me at any time throughout the program. Please note that the views and opinions expressed in the presentation are those of the authors and do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Takeda. You may see also a couple poll questions throughout the program, and I highly encourage everyone to participate and take those poll questions. Before we begin the main part of the program, I'd like to provide just a quick, short introductory background about Inspire. Who is Inspire? For millions of patients around the world, Inspire is the largest online health community for them to connect with other patients who understand what they're going through. And for life science companies and other healthcare professionals, Inspire is the go-to platform for patient and caregiver data, research, and engagement. The platform supports things with our partners to support them in conducting patient-centered evidence generation studies, clinical trial optimization to support their design as recruitment, and also working with a lot of teams when their product is in the market to directly educate the patients and promote awareness campaigns. And people often ask me, Richard, like, where do these patients come from, and how does your community grow so large? Why is it the largest? Well, when Inspire was started by our founder, Brian Lowe, he instituted a very strong guiding principle for how we think about and how we actually build our community for patients and caregivers. Inspire is completely free to join, and most importantly, we strive to provide a safe and trustworthy space for them to interact, sharing their deepest experience as they interact and go through their journey. As a result, the reason that we're growing so large is that we actually didn't need to find these patients because they were able to find each other on our platform, and millions of them. Due to the billions of words and millions of posts they have written on Inspire that have enabled the search engines to be really good at connecting them in a condition-specific way. And that's really interesting because now we've observed over 3,500 unique medical condition that's represented and reported by our patient and caregiver members. So another question I often get is, what are some of the primary conditions, health conditions that people are using Inspire for if this is a health community? Here are some of the major condition categories that you're seeing on the screen, from left to right and bottom left, bottom right. Not every single user who visits Inspire decides to join. And when I joined Inspire years ago, I remember there were only about 300,000 members, and today we've grown to 10 times that almost, to close to 3 million. And members are consented and contactable when we need to invite them to participate in research. So what's really fascinating to me about the platform and the size of the membership across these health conditions whether it's cancer or other conditions. If you look at the bottom left, you see a number of select rare disease community that are represented on Inspire. We have over 800,000 of them on Inspire. Being someone who's been working in the rare disease space and always trying to find rare disease patient to even learn about their experiences, what they're going through, it's been super difficult. But when I joined Inspire and seeing, wow, all these patients already on Inspire, and not just some of them, but a large portion of them, when we compare to the prevalence rate, it's incredible that they're all here already. So what does this all mean? To have such a critical mass of patient and caregiver across many disease areas. Over the last many years, I've been here, people from different parts of the healthcare ecosystem begin joining Inspire. We have people from pharma, medical device companies, healthcare providers, payers, patient advocacy groups, health technology companies, and more. What was really interesting and exciting to me was that all of the individuals that joined really looked at this independently, had the same impression, and said, wow, this is such an incredible resource, and we ought to be doing something, and something that can be done for RWE. And so we built it. A decentralized, community power integrated rural data and evidence generation platform that brings together data from every point in the patient's health journey. We're now able to combine deep condition specific patient experience data and overlay that with other types of data that you may be more familiar with, like administrative claims or medical claims, pharmacy claims, EHR data, unstructured EHR data, notes, labs. And some of the newer type of data we're using in the real world, like validated PRO surveys that are traditionally more used in clinical trials. These did identify consented data can now be used for secondary research, and patients have the choice on Inspire to receive a copy of their data, but also compare with other patients in a very safe and de-identify anonymized way, unless they want to reveal it to others. And we couldn't have done all of this, and we're still building it, and we're continue to make it better. And we couldn't have done this alongside with our partners. So we partner on the left side. You can see we partner with over 100 patient advocacy groups to really provide Inspire as a community to their membership, to connect with other peer patients for the condition that they care about the most. And we work really closely with life science and various medical institutions, as you can see on the right. And we have shared some of those, publications and study results on the handout section that is freely available for you to download. And we'll look at a couple cases. The first one I'll talk a little bit more about is the public story that Pfizer they were so excited about the result, they published this on their own website called Breakthroughs. This is a case where Pfizer came to us and had a hypothesis that they believe there are these individuals that carry rare genetic variants and have a strong tolerance against cancer and are surviving much better than other cancer patients. And they've been striving so many years to trying to find them, but they hadn't been able to. So they came to us and said, if we can find a couple patients, they would swim. Well, not the one person was a amateur swimmer, so he said he would swim over Baltic Sea to recruit that patient to study that person or individuals. And we look at this question and we leverage our data set. We were able to find quickly within weeks thousands of individuals that qualified against the criteria that we were looking for. And not only we were able to identify them within a few weeks, we were able to not just screen them, but enroll them to a study, including their family members. And we also combined their self-reported patient experience data, natural history data, along with their medical record to confirm kind of the phenotypes that we were looking for. But we couldn't have done this without first conducting a reverse phenotyping based on the patient text data, the user-generated content data that these individuals have been sharing over the last many years. We're able to reverse phenotype and identify them to then allow us to engage with them directly. So we have a different problem now in this study, unlike other clinical study where patient recruitment is actually a challenge. In this case, we had too many people to choose from because we were only budgeted to sequence about 100 individuals. So at the end, we were able to collect their samples and generate really interesting data that are now being analyzed by the researchers. While there are many other examples, I won't go into details. Here are some of the select examples I'm showing you, and I also won't go into details on these. On the very first two on the left with Stanford and Mayo, we also leverage the same proprietary data that belongs to the Inspire database, where we were analyzing the patient text data, or UGC, user-generated content, where we were able to identify retrospectively associating the patient's experiences with identifying novel adverse drug reactions to 3 chemotherapeutic drugs on Inspire. And we published that on JAMA Oncology. We were able to use the same technique, and we talked to Dr. Tamimi at Mayo, and he had a hunch where he believed for over the last 20 years where he practiced medicine. He asked us whether we can look at patients who are receiving statin and their correlation to memory loss. And we looked at that question, and we were able to discover a correlation, statistical significant correlation to memory loss for patients on statin and memory loss. We also partner with life science companies on the right. 2 examples are shown here, where these companies like Novartis and Takeda have worked with us on using patient experience data to better understand the patient journey. For Novartis, it was the concordance and discordance for a rare cancer patient that's really hard to find, and trying to compare the perspective of the doctors, HCP treating those patients versus what the patients are going through. And for Takeda, it was a CIDP study for a rare neuromuscular disease, where we quantifying by starting with a qualitative study that perhaps Megan will talk about today. So as we transition to the first speaker to the program, Edward, I want everyone to, who's listening here, to think about why we're talking about patient-centered real evidence for rare diseases today in the webinar. For many of us working in real-world evidence, we're experiencing a changing evidence requirement, and we also been challenged by this great divide, right? The data divide, where data are really siloed, where it's really hard to access and have a complete picture and story of what's happening to the patient. But also, there's also a great patient divide, where clinical trials are designed to support the product to get approval, and these patients are not often the same as the patients in the real world, meaning that the way that we're assessing the efficacy versus effectiveness. So things are getting to get better, right? We saw the 21st Century Cures Act in 2016 that was enacted. We also are seeing things like patient-focused drug development and many other real-world evidence draft guidances released by the FDA to support our efforts toward precision medicine, to improve our ability to better understand the patient journey and how we can improve their outcomes. We're no longer just able to just look at clinical data, but we're also needing to incorporate patient experience data when we can, especially for rare diseases where there are a lot of unknowns and gaps in the traditional data sources that we work with. So with the advent of technology and platform to assess patient-level data in a regulatory compliant manner, we now have the capabilities to address these challenges. So with that, I'm happy to introduce our first speaker today, Dr. Edward Chou. Dr. Edward Chou is the Associate Director on the Takeda U.S. Medical Value Evidence Generation HEOR team. He leads and contributes to the overall outcome research strategy work streams for marketed assets as relates to the real-world evidence generation through observational studies, as well as clinical trials. This includes value communication, field tool development, and also Dr. Chou, before joining Takeda, he was assistant professor, and also he's currently serving on a few editorial board, including the Journal of American Pharmacy Association and the Frontiers in Drug Safety and Regulation. So with that, I'll turn it to Edward.
Okay. Thank you so much, Richard, for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. I am humbled to be here, spending time with you to talk about RWE. By no means do I claim to be an RWE expert. Instead, I consider myself to be here as a catalyst to briefly go over a high-level overview of RWE, hoping the presentation can serve as a foundation for our discussion and continued learning. When asking about RWE, you might hear a variety of explanations from different people, and everyone seems to have a very valid point. What does RWE entail exactly, and how can we deal with challenges that come with it? That's why I purposely chose "There is Something About RWE" as my presentation title. Of course, this title is meant to be lighthearted. It borrows from the movie title "There is Something About Mary." Oh, I just realized I may have accidentally given away the information on the age group that I belong to. Okay, anyway, we will go over some basics of RWE before diving into real examples that demonstrate how RWE can help us conduct better research for rare disease, which will be covered by my colleague, Dr. Gower, next. Here is the outline for my presentation today, organized to cover these 5 points. And we will start with understanding what RWE is first. US FDA has defined RWD, real-world data, and RWE previously, and you can read the definition, exact description about the definition here. Historically, FDA has used RWD and RWE to monitor and evaluate the safety of approved drugs. Given the scientific advances in the availability and analysis of RWD over time, FDA is committed to capitalizing the full potential of RWE generated from RWD. Of course, it goes without saying that the RWD must be collected in a way that is rigorous and designed fit for purpose for regulatory needs. The second is talking about patient-centered RWE and the components. So what is patient-centered RWE? Patient-centered RWE refers to evidence generated from data and information collected from routine clinical practice and the patient experiences that prioritize the perspective, needs, and the preferences of patients. This type of evidence is specifically focused on understanding the real-world outcomes and impacts of medical interventions from the patient's point of view. Therefore, it is important to engage patients, obtain data directly from patients to incorporate their preferences and values, in addition to considering clinical outcomes, of course, in real-world settings. These components are what regulatory agencies recognize and valued as well when they consider RWE for their regulatory decision-making. What are the potential impacts that patient-centered RWE has on the healthcare system? Patient-centered RWE has the potential to provide valuable insights into the effectiveness and the safety of healthcare interventions in real-world settings, as you know, as well as to inform shared decision-making between patients and healthcare providers. It can also be used to evaluate the impact of health policies and interventions on patients' lives and experiences. Overall, patient-centered RWE plays a crucial role in advancing evidence-based medicine, precision medicine, or personalized medicine, and improving the quality of healthcare. Let's talk about challenges of patient-centered RWE. If it's so important, what are the challenges we are facing? Major challenges that we encounter frequently are usually about data quality. Is the data complete? Is the patient privacy protected during the data sharing process? How about the ethical issues that come with it? Do different databases from multiple sources have the same formats and the standards? Can we avoid, or how can we avoid biases caused by confounding variables that we cannot control or selection of the study populations? Addressing these challenges will require collaborations among healthcare stakeholders And it also requires ongoing efforts to improve data quality, standardization, and the privacy protections, while we promote transparency and ethical data use. Despite these challenges, patient-centered RWE holds great potential for improving patient-centered care and the healthcare decision-making. And allow me to, let's just stop here for a second to talk about rare disease in the context of patient-centered RWE, as this patient-centered RWE will have a very profound impact on our research for the rare disease. In the United States, a disease is considered as rare if it affects fewer than 200,000 Americans. Some countries and the European Union might have a slightly different definition for it. According to the NIH, there are approximately 7,000 rare diseases affecting about 25 to 30 million Americans. This actually equals to 1 in 10 Americans has some kind of rare disease. Of these 7,000 known rare diseases, approximately 95% have no treatment available. Given rare diseases nature, we definitely will have small sample size issues. We will have insufficient patient data, as well as our limited understanding and the knowledge about meaningful study endpoints, or how can we properly develop a study endpoints for the research. Many of these challenges listed here could be amplified further. So how, given knowing all these challenges, how can we develop a patient-centered RWE? Earlier this year, Value in Health journal published a paper to offer recommendations regarding how to develop patient-centered RWE. Funded by the Pharma Foundation, the authors recommended involving patients and patient experiences data in all stages of developing a patient-centered RWE generation plan. You can find the strategies they mention in detail in the paper. And basically, the general recommendations are, we will definitely increase the frequency and the meaningful opportunities to include patients and the patient organizations throughout the process, and specifically determining which RWD should be collected. And then we will engage all relevant healthcare stakeholders, patient included, to refine research questions and ensure research protocols that are designed to help inform decision-making. However, keep in mind that these recommendations should not be considered as a gold standard, just yet. Testing the application of these emerging recommendations should be done case by case for each single study, and that process will be very important. So far, we have briefly reviewed what RWE is and the key aspects or components and its potential impact of patient-centered RWE in health systems, as well as potential challenges we might face when generating patient-centered RWE. Then lastly is the recommendations made by the patient-centered RWE working group. Dr. Gower will share her experience in patient-centered RWD research for rare disease next. Thank you for your attention. Richard, back to you.
The next speaker up is Dr. Megan Gower. Dr. Megan Gower is a clinical scientist on the Takeda U.S. Medical Value and Evidence Generation clinical research team. She oversees the development and clinical trial designs, including phase 4 and collaborative studies, and she really also supports the study conduct, synopsis, and protocol development, as well as aligning the development timeline of the projects with different therapeutic strategies, including immunology, plasma-derived therapies, transplant, GI, and other rare endocrine diseases. With that, I'll turn it to Megan.
Thank you, Richard, for the wonderful introduction, and thank you, Edward, for such a great foundation that you kind of laid for the discussion that I'm going to talk about now. So as kind of hinted to earlier, now that Edward's kind of gone through the general specifics related to RWD and RWE, I'm going to talk about some of the applications across the clinical development timeline of where we're able to kind of incorporate and use these different concepts. Do note that even though I'm going to cover a lot of different topics, this isn't all encompassing. There are going to be many wonderful different approaches that you can also think beyond what I kind of present today. This is going to be the general outline of my presentation. I'll kind of go over what patient-focused drug development is, what we think about when we think about what we want from our patients, and kind of how their experiences can impact what we do. Kind of how we apply this specifically in the rare disease space, and then what challenges we might have, and then I'll kind of end with an example of kind of how this could be applied in like a study basis. So I'm going to start by talking about what PFDD, or patient-focused drug development, is. So this is based on the FDA guidance. Richard did allude to it earlier in his opening discussion, but the FDA has been working on providing guidances in this realm of kind of how you approach PFDD. Essentially, it's a systematic approach to help ensure that a patient's experience, their perspectives, needs, and priorities are being captured and, where appropriately incorporated into the drug development and evaluation process. So what I've got kind of laid out on the slide here is kind of the different ways it can be applied during the drug development process. However, I will note here, even though I didn't include it on this slide, there are considerations that can also be made in the preclinical and the discovery realm of drug development as well. But given the nature of the talk today, I'm kind of focusing on the clinical development and post-marketing. Also, many of these items, even though they're kind of bucketed under a specific area, are absolutely applicable during different phases of development as well. So definitely in early clinical development, but throughout, there are definitely a lot of ways where you can do some of that patient engagement work that Edward talked about earlier, and are able to kind of assess, what are their opinions on the study that we're putting forward? Are there areas, are there barriers, are there concerns, of places where we can make things maybe easier for the patients to have access to the study, and how are we able to incorporate a broader voice of patients within our studies? It's also a great idea across your programs to think about getting their input into materials, informed consents, and what outcome measures we're including. Sometimes, even though there are requirements we have from that regulatory perspective, they may or may not be the same as what our patients find important. And sometimes it's crucial to also think about the data we're generating and kind of how, what our patients want to see at the end of what we're developing at the end of the day. Patients can help support the development of recruitment strategies. Definitely can let you know if there's going to be barriers, or especially when you look at rare disease, it's not uncommon for our patients to be located quite a distance from the main centers where they often are treated for these conditions, and can kind of help ways of being, helping with identifying individuals or barriers that they would see. They can definitely help with their voices when you think about patient-focused drug development meetings or other meetings, of what their thoughts are of what's going on within their realm of the disease that they have, and kind of, what is important to them as far as the products that are coming to market. They can provide feedback as part of the communities. Obviously, Richard talked about this a little bit earlier with Inspire being an online patient community. They definitely provide a lot of different feedbacks and discussions related to their disease states that they experience on a daily basis. We can also look at patient-reported outcome measures. While not uncommon, we do use them regularly just as a part of standard development process. There's been some shifts across just development in general of where we're maybe looking at more specific or more relevant patient-reported outcomes that maybe better characterize their struggles or common issues that they have within their disease states. And then definitely it's good to get a feel from the patients themselves of maybe where there's education gaps or tools that could be helpful for them, especially with technology advances of where we can help provide them apps or supportive things to help them better be treated in the conditions that they have and be better controlled. All right, so next I'm going to move into talking about how do we identify what is important to our patients. And I will note, we talked about some of the materials that have been included as part of this webinar. We have posted the PFDD guidances from the FDA. This is one of them here of kind of how we approach finding out what is important to our patient populations. I won't go through the FDA specific definitions here in their entirety, but one of the things that I would like to highlight here are some of the differences between qualitative, quantitative, and mixed approach to the research. Essentially, when we're looking at qualitative research, you're going to be looking mostly at unstructured data. This is obviously going to be a lot more subjective in its conclusions, but the key thing here is when you want to consider research in this realm is thinking about patients' experiences in their own words is what we're looking at in the qualitative realm. More when we move into the quantitative research, we're looking at structured data, and it'll be a lot more objective in the conclusions that we're able to draw. So this one's going to be needed to be a lot more quantifiable data collection that we'll do as part of quantitative. And this will include items like surveys, and I didn't mention it previously, but qualitative is often going to be our interviews, focus groups, panels, where we can get those patient perspectives in their own voice. Mixed approach is obviously a little bit as it sounds, where it's going to be some combination of those different tactics in a single research study or program that you're looking at doing, where you're going to incorporate both qualitative and quantitative researches. And this could be something like, maybe a focus group that you're going to do, and then some type of collection of structured data from social media, or something like a health database or something like that to support the research. So next, I want to go into some of the insights that can be derived from patient experience, and then also, I think, which is kind of important at the end of the day, the impact that they can have. So types of insights that can be derived, obviously I talked about a little bit already, would be patient experience data. Patients, specifically those in the rare disease realm, are going to be the ones that have the most knowledge about what their experiences are, what it's like having that condition from their perspective, and then are there things that we should think about prioritizing from a need or priority perspective to them, and in general, what is going to be crucial for the development of something in that disease state. Patient preference can also be very important when you think about products and how they're used by patients at the end of the day. This is, as it sounds, is kind of how we're going to get their preference on the products and kind of what they want, what they find valuable. And then, that we see this quite a bit with delivery methods. Is there a preference for them between infusion, subcutaneous or oral administration of products, and can anything in this preference realm kind of help with the design of clinical trials, or kind of help us be thoughtful of kind of when we get to the end road, when we think about how patients will ultimately use our products, what does that look like from their preference perspective? Also, something to think about depending on the product is treatment burden. This is data obviously collected on just treatment in general. Are there symptoms and side effects that their experiences? Most importantly, are there impacts on their daily lives? Are they having to do really long infusions, or, are they down for a bit of time if they've had to do a really large volume of fluid administered under the skin? Is there any impact to their physical function when they're having a treatment done? And then is it impacting their quality of life? Are they missing crucial events like birthdays, anniversaries, things like that the treatment's weighing in on? And sometimes there are things that we can do here to make things more beneficial for them. And obviously sometimes there's not, on the nature of the product, but it's important to get their perspective of kind of, what that treatment experience is like for them. The thing I really want to talk about here, though, is the patient voice impact. We've seen a lot of different examples here where we do take the time to get these insights from our patients, and they actually can be very supportive in things we're doing. The first one I want to highlight is we have seen approvals of products coming to market done based on patient input from these patient-focused drug development meetings that are done. We've also seen the FDA release disease-specific guidances because there's been an identified need that's come out of some of these conversations where we realized maybe there is a need for some, unified information across the board. One that's particularly interesting is we've seen products return to market based on this. And this has been done both from patient and caregiver perspective that's come here. But because, as Edward talked about, there's often not a lot of treatments for these patients, we have seen a few products that, that, maybe that benefit risk ratio wasn't as ideal as it would be from maybe that research perspective, but from the patient and caregiver perspective, it actually was invaluable to have something that would help them. And we have seen where they actually have returned to market. Similar to the FDA guidances, we've also seen a patient advocacy initiated FDA guidance, draft guidance come out in a rare disease. This was in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So these are just some of the examples. There's a lot more that's been done from the patient voice impact, but they can actually really play a really integral part in the development process as well, and kind of where we get at the end of the day, or what that means ultimately for a product. So I'm going to go into data generation applications now. So as Edward talked about a little bit earlier, there are 7,000 distinct rare disease types. It affects a lot of individuals worldwide. Even though the populations for that specific disease may be small, there's quite a few individuals that have rare conditions across the globe. And there's a lot of great ways that we can use real-world evidence to kind of help support this, especially because the ends can often be quite small from the trial perspective, and making sure that we still have the data that we need at the end of the day to support, the development of new products for them. You can definitely supplement clinical trial data for drug approval applications. This could be some of those patient-reported outcomes or other measures to help support it. This is very common in rare disease, especially where you'll see guidance from the FDA to better understand the disease itself. A lot of our incredibly rare conditions, we don't even know what the, progression and the history of the disease even looks like. Is there a linear progression? Are there periods of relapse, and improvement? And it's not a straightforward progression process. And definitely real-world evidence can help quite a bit in this area. It can help with expanding on-label indications for existing products. This can be done through observational studies or extension studies that you've done. The thing that I'll note here, you can also think about using real-world evidence that's come out of it, but we've seen some bumps over time with using literature can be challenging in this application, just because we often see that in clinical practice, the definitions of efficacy outcomes can vary quite a bit, and can always not lead to the substantive data that we need. Edward talked about this a bit, that the quality of the data is really important, and sometimes we don't always see this in the real world realm. We can consider using historical control arms and single arm studies. This is important for really small populations where you may not have enough, and is also an ethical consideration. Are there conditions where maybe it's not ethical to think about putting a patient on a placebo control? And would it be better to use controlled data if data is available? I've seen this most often in the oncology realm from my position, but this is a growing area in general where there's a lot more control data sets than there have been in the past, and imagine they will continue to grow into the future. And then they can also help with post-approval observational efficacy and safety testing. We see this quite a bit with like registry type studies. So, to talk a little bit about challenges and barriers. I talked about one a little bit with some of the inconsistencies in real world data, but it is very common that we do have a poor understanding of the natural history of rare diseases, and this is often a gap that needs to be filled. These individuals can be very small in number, especially when you look at incredibly rare diseases, and can cause quality analyses issues, and can require supplementation of data, or can just be a challenge in general. Maybe we don't know the full pathophysiology of the disease or how it manifests over time, and this can make it difficult to locate these patients and how do we find them. Also very common, depending on whether there's been research done in that specific condition or not, there may not be endpoints available for that rare disease, and then we do have to try and gauge, what is the most appropriate assessment of improvement in that condition. And this is definitely where patients, as we learn more about the disease, can kind of help guide with that. And then there could be underrepresented genetic diseases and other types of rare diseases in the healthcare coding system. Maybe it is very rare and there isn't things like ICD-10 codes or other codes that make it very easy to identify these patients. And then it requires, an approach to how do you identify them, but that can also vary a lot across different institutions then as they define that out. All right. And then coming towards the end of my talk, I just want to talk a little bit about a way that you could potentially approach this research process. This is not a set in stone. There's a lot of ways you could interchange these pieces. and could approach this or remove things that I'm talking about here. But some objectives you could think about when you're looking at doing research this realm is if you need to understand the patient or caregiver experience in that specific rare disease. A lot of the times, there's diagnostic and specific, but is there treatment issues? Is there inconsistency with the way they're being treated once they are diagnosed? Just characterizing what the burden of their illness is and what that looks like. Obviously, quality of life is a very important one and is continuing to grow in its importance. What barriers and gaps exist in the care process for them, and then communication with their care teams. Are there gaps? Because often the times they see a lot of different individuals as part of their care teams. Is there good communication or is there not with these patients? And on the right, I kind of have a specific approach that you could consider, first kind of benchmarking, kind of what research has been done and what gaps may remain. Then you can consider doing qualitative. This is obviously a mixed research perspective that I'm proposing here on the slide, where you could look at getting interviews from the patients and can either use that as some type of informative process for the continued research that you'll do, or could answer a specific question that you would prefer to have from the patients in their voice. Can look at doing quantitative research then, most often a survey where you'll be able to field those specific questions that you want feedback on to help address those objectives. And then you also can consider the ability, especially with a lot of platforms like Inspire, as Richard talked about earlier, there is the ability to also kind of help supplement with EHR or claims data, the information that you've gotten from the patients as well. And then one thing I encourage you to think about that I'll kind of wrap up with before I turn it back to Richard is a lot of platforms do have the ability to do content dissemination to their members. And this is really important to help keep them engaged if they can kind of see, all the great things that they're getting out of the research at the end of the day and kind of how they impacted things. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Richard.
Thank you, Megan. That was a wonderful tour of the applications and how we can think about approaching patient-centered real-world evidence for rare diseases. I remember when I met Megan a couple years ago, it was very apparent right from the get-go that wow, every time we talk, there's always a very strong mindset around what we can do for patients and very, very strong patient-minded. So thank you for sharing all your perspective and experiences today, Megan. All right, just waiting for, looks like we have Megan and Edward back on stage virtually. Why don't we look like we have a question for Megan. Megan, can you talk about some of the ways you have incorporated or from your experience, your perspective about incorporating some of the patient experience data into the process? And what would your recommendation be for somebody who's just getting started in the rare disease space? What are some of the potential obstacles or that person should be thinking about?
Yeah, thanks for the great question, Richard, and thank you for the question in the chat. So some of the ways that I've seen this patient perspective kind of incorporated into the process is going to be, we've definitely done some of that patient engagement perspective of kind of where we can think about, one, making our studies user-friendly. We've definitely had the opportunity to maybe make unnecessary in-person visits remote. I kind of talked about it a little bit in my talk, where it's not uncommon for us to see these patients be incredibly long distances from main academic centers. So the more we can limit touch points can be helpful for them. We've also been able to make patient materials more friendly for our participants in the study to make ICFs easier to read. There's been some unique crests that I've seen from patient materials for materials to help them track when they need to be getting infusions and stuff like that to kind of help them be adherent. And at the end of the day, those types of items really help us get better data from our patients if they're not missing those touch points where we need them to complete diaries or come in for visits. Those types of things I've seen from my perspective, specifically in the rare front, of things to help them, especially if they have to travel to appointments, are a big one. When you're thinking about getting perspectives from patients, really hone in on what you think is important for the study or the program that you're doing and what your questions are that you want to do. I find it's very easy to create a very long laundry list of things, but obviously patients typically are only willing to give us so much of their time. So I encourage you to be really thoughtful and really hone in as much as possible. And I know it's easier said than done, of what we kind of corely want from these patients as far as their perspective perspectives. And then also thinking about ones that you can apply. If you're not going to have that flexibility to do remote visits, you might not want to inquire about that with your patients. Your time might be better spent elsewhere where you think you could make adjustments in the study or the program. Obstacles to think about as far as the perspectives and experiences I kind of talked about a little bit is just, sometimes they can be challenging to incorporate. We're limited by regulatory processes a lot of times, and then also reaching them. Sometimes even though they're there or in a digital space like we have now in a community, they still can be difficult to get the perspectives and gain that knowledge. So those are kind of my 2 cents there. If there's anything you'd like more on, please feel free to drop a question and I can elaborate on anything else you'd like to hear about. But yeah, thank you, Richard.
All right, thank you. It looks like we have another question for you, Megan. But I'll have a. Why don't we go to a second question that's more general? The question is, in thinking about the different types of real-world data and the sources of the real data and the quality considerations, what type of real-world data are you seeing more traction and adoption? From your perspective and your experiences. I think this could be a question that both of you can maybe touch on. So maybe I'll start with Edward since Megan, you just went.
From my experiences, I think while we value all different data sources in terms of patients' experiences or their perspectives, I really think that from the technology, wearable, those kind of devices, if data are collected from those, because they actually can potentially overcome to a certain extent the issues that patient can be really far away from the clinical trial site or study site. And also a lot of symptoms may not be really easily monitored, but should be monitored throughout the day. And those devices actually can capture all those data points and will be very valuable to scientific research, but also create the easiness for researchers as well as patients, because they basically don't really need to manually collect those data by themselves either. So I think those that particular source of data source actually is, I think it's getting more popular, and it's actually while it provides very valuable information.
Thank you. Megan?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I definitely agree with Edward on that. That's a big one. And it's a way to help decrease patient burden, but also kind of increase the robustness of the data that you're getting regularly from them. The other one that I would kind of chime in that we're seeing an increase on is the use of AI, specifically in the rare disease realms, the development of new algorithms that can kind of help identify patients with these conditions more efficiently, which can both be helpful from the RWE perspective, but can also help the patients from the diagnosis, that they're actually getting flagged by physicians where maybe they should have a touch point with them if a potential condition that they may or may not be aware that they have has been identified. So that's the other one that I would probably add in addition to the great thought that Edward had.
Thank you. We have a question for Megan. So Megan, you touched on how there are a lack of efficacy endpoints for rare diseases as well as limiting touch points. Do you have experience that your company ever partner with other companies to develop novel efficacy endpoints that are home-based?
Okay. That's a good question. I do have some experience in the past, not so much with like a company to company perspective, but I do have a little bit of a past from the CRO perspective where we've maybe worked with different sponsors to kind of strategize, what might be the best approach. This is often a good place where to do a lot of FDA touch point as well. With what you're thinking, but a lot of it'll depend on what's known about the condition. Do you know if there's something specific like a neuromuscular condition where you're going to expect issues with grip strength, gait, and are you looking at those types of improvements maybe, or something else? So it varies a little bit by the specific disease state as well, but I haven't been personally involved with a company to company, but I've definitely been involved where maybe there's been some committees where they've discussed where we want to go or what we're seeing in practice with physicians about what we think an identifiable endpoint might be for a specific population. Specifically, it's going to be the first product that's kind of exploring that disease state, and there's maybe not a benchmark from another similar condition. I know that's kind of vague, but it is a challenging area as you think about what you need to benchmark your efficacy endpoints off of.
All right. It looks like we have a few more questions. We'll see how many we can get through. Here's another question, I think, for both of you. When you guys are collecting patient experience data, such as surveys, and Megan, you mentioned the qualitative methods in your mixed method slide. What do you guys think about in your experience in terms of the timeline? Do you guys have challenges around getting the data in a timely manner? What's the typical consideration around timeline to collect the data, I think? Edward, do you want to go first, or since Megan just went?
Based on my past experience, not necessarily with my current company, it's really, I think the most challenging part was always about where to find those patients and how can we recruit them into the study. Once they are in, and we already know how to collect the data through what tools or means. Actually, the timeline are not necessary. It's not necessarily an issue. It's really about we spend a lot of time trying to identify where your patients are, who they are, how we can recruit them into the study, or how we can retrieve the data from them. If it's not a trial, we don't really need to recruit patients. How can we retrieve those data from from the patient population we are interested in? So for me, based on my past personal experience, it's more like time spent in that regard instead of really collecting data process.
No, I will absolutely agree with Edward on that it's usually that finding the patients. And especially if you were to design a study similar like the one that I went through on my last slide, where you're kind of maybe hinging something off that qualitative component for your quantitative, that's where it can kind of push your timelines a little bit. In the past, I've seen this where for the qualitative phase, we wanted a symptomatic perspective from our patients, but the condition that they have isn't always readily symptomatic and across the population. So it did take quite a bit, to Edward's point, to kind of hone in on where those patients were to be able to recruit for that component. But it was much faster. We didn't have that stipulation once we got to our quantitative. We wanted to open it more robustly to the entire disease state there. But this is where I would encourage you, if you have avenues like advocacy partners or platforms like Inspire, things like that, that if you think you're going to have a really challenging population, really think about what your avenues are to locate these patients ahead of time. And then it's not such a scramble on the back end when you realize you're not able to recruit to try and locate them.
All right. It looks like we're getting close to the end of the webinar, so I'll do one more last question. That to sum up, I guess, to offer both you and Megan, you and Edward, a moment to give your final remarks. So with that note, like as we end this webinar, what are some of the final recommendations do you have for the audience today? And as we look forward in bridging the gap, as we talked about earlier, it's such a great data divide and patient divide that we've been working towards in bridging. And what were your final recommendations and remarks for people who are looking to enhance their efforts in generating patient-centered RWE for rare diseases? Edward?
Sure. My recommendation may sound a little bit broad. So basically, I really think that if we think about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, have we really imagined what we are having here today? Probably not. And so there are a lot of advances, in terms of technology. For example, technology to we call next generation sequencing. So now we have a better way to diagnose rare disease and for genomics data. Or we have advanced bioengineering technology or AI machine learning that allow us to really process, connect data from multiple sources relatively quickly and also process all those nuances, information, insight to do data mining. So all these advancement over the recent years really are exciting. And my recommendation is although from time to time we may feel like we are moving forward with the baby step, but actually if we see the entire time in a longer time, we actually make a lot of progresses already. So rare disease actually deserve our attention, and a lot of exciting things are happening right now. I really think we should really keep up with all the informations and really keep learning, and also be optimistic about the development, and just really trying to make contributions to improving patients' health for those who have suffer from rare disease.
Awesome. I
Thank
know we're
you,
coming
Megan.
close on time, so I will keep mine short and sweet. Don't be afraid to try something new when it comes to thinking about how you can incorporate patient-centered perspectives into your research. I know in industry, especially depending on whether you come from a smaller or larger company, we can get quite set in our ways of how we've kind of always collected things. I just encourage you to be curious and to be adventurous in how you want to incorporate new ways of doing in this realm into what you're doing. And at the end of the day, they tend to pay off quite well with being able to add perspectives or making your trials more patient friendly in the data we get. So just be willing to try something new is what I would say to kind of end from my side.
In closing, we hope you enjoyed this HealthEconomics.com webinar sponsored by Inspire, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.